When the music starts rocking, put your finger on the button, subscribe, and start knocking. Did that make sense? I worked on that joke for like 15 minutes, Dustin, and I feel like it still didn't come out right.
It didn't come out at all.
Didn't come out right. I was trying to ask you. Thank you, by the way. Thank you and you and you and you and all of those that join us every single Friday. If you're listening on YouTube to Because Cannabis from Wayward Media, or if you're listening on our audio wherever you listen to podcasts, Because Cannabis from Wayward Media. Thank you for joining us as we do new shows every single Friday. YouTube, hit subscribe. That's what I was trying to ask him, Dustin Kava. Great to see you again. I was trying to ask him to subscribe, but I felt like the words got all kind of jumbled and fumbled. Like I had a bad audition or something, right? That's what it was like. It was like I had a terrible audition just now.
And you've definitely had plenty of those, haven't you?
I have. Do you ever freeze up? You freeze up in the moment? Have you ever like panicked in a public presentation or a speech or an audition? I don't know if you've done that. I have dabbled in the acting world. Thespian. Have you ever done any of that? Like just totally had a attack and had to leave a live situation, like tap out. I'm done.
No, but right before, I mean, I'm the type of guy who right behind the curtain, I'm shaking, but the second the curtain's open, I'm perfectly comfortable and fine. It's
perfectly comfortable.
It's actually in place.
I like to say, the reason we meet here every single week is because cannabis, right? The people we have on the show, we have an amazing guest lined up today. I said that dramatically. I'm going to really work my acting technique into this. Our guest today, also a fellow thespian from his past. And so I feel like he's critiquing my techniques right now. Actually, I can see him in the screen. He's got a scarf on. He looks very directory in my mind right now. That's what I feel like we're seeing from our guest. We're excited to talk with him. I have tried my hand at acting. There are a few things where you can watch on YouTube where B.C. Wehman doesn't advance the art of acting, Dustin. But because cannabis, I bombed an audition so bad. So bad. I'll bring my guest in a second. Maybe he's got a bad audition story. So I am doing this in my life where I am driving. We're here in Northeast Ohio, and I'm driving to multiple states to do auditions, right? And so I got this big audition in Pittsburgh. It's about 2 hours away from here where I live. And I got to go there and audition for this like low budget horror film, but a paying gig. And at this point, a paying gig is a yes, please, check, please. I'm going to take that thing. Right. So I go there and I drive. I nail it. Problem. Can you come back at 4 p.m.? And this is about 11:30 in the morning. Can you come back at 4 p.m. for a callback? I'm like 2 hours from home, right? Like I gotta stay. So I am a little bit familiar with Pittsburgh, not that great, but I'm kind of in a rural area. And Pittsburgh goes from urban to rural very quickly. Cross one of those three rivers, get to the other side, and you are in a whole different country. Literally, sometimes it feels like the militia signs pop up. It gets weird in rural eastern PA. And so I'm taking a tour. I end up at this little like coffee house. I have a crepe. I don't know if I've ever even had a crepe before. I feel like our guest today eats a lot of crepes. I've never even had a crepe before. I have a crepe and I still have like 2.5 hours to kill. So I spark it. Right? So what's going to hurt? I got like 2 hours. How is bad can this be? That's plenty of time to go up, roller coaster, come down. But be at that place, that perfect place. And the problem is I roll into the parking lot and I panic. I look in the mirror. My eyes are the color of your shirt, by the way. My eyes are the color of your shirt. They look like they're open but closed at the same time. You know what I'm talking about if you've had enough weed. Our guest today smoked 38,000 times. He knows what it feels like to look like this. I'm panicking. I walk into this and it's like at a church. And now I'm feeling sacrilegious. And I'm not even a religious person, but I'm in total meltdown, right? Just total meltdown. I go into the bathroom. I sit in an old, ugly blue, not the color of your background today, Dustin. You look fantastic today, by the way. I sit in this bathroom stall and just kind of shake for like 10 minutes. And I get in my car and I drive home. That's exactly. I didn't even bother to go to the audition at all. And we have Andrew DeAngelo, like a super huge guest for Because Cannabis. And here I am pontificating about failed auditions because Cannabis, name of the show. Andrew, from like, what do you have to do to audition for Superior Court? Like when you're on that show, do you actually, is it whoever shows up? Because I've been there. Like just because you're there, you get the gig. And we'll get to Last Prisoner Project and Harborside and all those things. But really, Andrew, we go way back machine here, like Simon and Peabody. Tell me some bad audition stories. I feel like I need to know from like life before what you do now.
Well, the Superior Court audition was very interesting. I went to college just outside of Los Angeles, and it was close enough to LA that every once in a while, some agents or other people, maybe they knew someone at the school or their cousin or their whatever, and they're in the audience. And so somehow I get this agent, and she signs me up, and I'm 19, and she's like, I got this audition for you, Superior Court. You go down there. And the audition was in the Capitol Records building in LA, where that round building that looks like a whole bunch
yeah, I could totally picture the iconic like sign and such.
Yeah, it was in that building.
Wow.
And of course, you know, you're in the hallway with all the other actors, and you know, the guy I was playing was like some crazy murderous kid who fell in love with a girl on a chat line. In those days, it is an analog chat line in the 1980s.
Oh, the shared phone chat lines. You guys ever had those? Like the shared phone where you had the
Yeah, like you press the little star and you get into the chat line. And so this kid fell in love with a girl and killed her grandmother because she wouldn't let him go out with her. And so that was the case. So the audition was just basically being a nut in front of the camera. And unlike you, BC, I did not smoke weed before the audition. I was trained. You know, they told us, don't you dare smoke weed before an audition. In fact, they didn't even mention that because you weren't allowed to say weed in school in those days, or you get kicked out of school if you said that. And I went and I did the audition, and it was one of those auditions. Sometimes actors, when you do an audition, you absolutely know you got the part. You just walk away from it and like, I got that part. I know it. And it was my very first job I ever booked on television as a young actor. And my agent calls me up, you know, when I get home. She's like, yeah, you got that. You booked that part. You're going down there and you're going to be doing this and that and the other. And of course, that's when the scary part began, because I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to be on TV. Holy crap. I don't know what to do.
I'm the crazy one, you know, like it's
oh, now that I'm a crazy guy on TV, I'll never be able to be anything else. And
exactly.
I had these dreams of being a leading man. I'm like, oh God, I killed a girl, not kissed a girl. Oh no.
I picture myself on like the first date with my future wife, and all of a sudden on TV it comes up and she looks at me like, you know, like
not you.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that is so funny.
It is interesting. And now look at you, Andrew DeAngelo. Now look at you, sir. No one cares. All those acting coaches and people who shunned you at different auditions, all them be damned. Because now you're rocking and rolling. You're changing the world quite literally right now, helping get people from places that they shouldn't be with the Last Prisoner Project. Andrew DeAngelo, Harborside, right? Co-founder of Harborside, along with your brother, Steve. It's great to have you on the show. We really appreciate you being here. I'm looking forward to chatting with you for a little bit. Yeah,
great to be with you guys. Always love to talk shop, man. Here we are.
Dustin loves talking shop. Dustin Kava. Dustin is let's say it for you because we'll get it out there. A former owner of a smoke shop here in Ohio. Not quite some of the legal issues you've had dealing with California's legalization, going through that and your whole family, but you know, going through some of those things, and we talk about that a lot. You know, just what it's like to work in a country, right, where it's federally illegal, but it's kind of state legal, and it's still changing every day. And we just had 2 states legalized recently, but who knows what happens with presidential elections. And you've been walking this. Dustin did this in a municipal level, right, for many years. You've been walking that tightrope. And I feel like, and maybe this is why the cannabis started, like the anxiety, I feel like that's a lot of anxiety for 30 years to work in a business that just doesn't know where it's at legally. Like just people want it, the government doesn't, and it's just that back and forth for 30 plus years. It's got to take its toll, Andrew.
Sure. There's definitely tolls that have been taken on my mind, body, and spirit doing this for so long, as I'm sure most of your listeners who've been even doing this a little while, your head spins a little bit with the schizophrenic nature of the legality. I mean, if you're in Ohio's got a whole different thing going on.
Super strict.
Yeah.
I was
strict. I know. I have clients there. I'm actually building I'm building new dispensaries there, that some of the new licenses I'm building in Ohio right now. So
can you say who?
No.
Okay. Yeah. Never mind. That's the whole point of Ohio, though.
I've got a launch plan I'm trying to execute here. when we get closer to launching, you guys can have me back on, and we'll definitely talk about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm learning all about the Board of Pharmacy and and like getting your logo approved and what that.
Oh yeah.
Months in advance, by the way, months in advance, like 90 days to put a billboard up or put a social media post. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're learning to send them like 50 things to approve at once so that we get a little bit of a head start. And yeah, it's but the medicine is coming to the people of Ohio one way or the other. And, you know, I assume less people are getting locked up there. I'm sure maybe probably some people still are. And I've met, you know, some of the regulators and very strict people, very serious people. So, you know, it's every framework is a little bit different in all the different states. As you mentioned, it's schizophrenic. It's crazy to keep track of, but and you have to learn a whole new system with every state that you work in.
I'm trying to think about, as you're entering to each one of these, I mean, is there a time when you just are like so flabbergasted by some of the expectations, and that, you know, that you're just like even in Ohio, we've done stuff where they said we can record video within the cultivators for marketing purposes. But again, we had to have that approved 90 days, 6 months in advance. And then once it was done, they said, oh, no, it can never be shown to anyone outside of the staff who are working within that facility at that time. And it was like, so then what is it, a training video at that point? Or, you know, and it was just so nuanced, and you could see the frustration across the board. But then, you know, you go to an hour north and they're just laughing at us. You know, you have to do what, or, you know, how much money did you spend to get that approved and how far in advance? And so I think it's really interesting, that dynamic across the board, and the fact that you personally get to see that on such a level.
Well, I mean, if you don't laugh, you'll cry, right? So I think it's important to keep our sense of humor with all these things, but it is absurd. I mean, what we have to do to sell a bag of weed these days is crazy, you know. So it is absurd, and there is a lot of pain right now because we've sort of won the debate about legalization, but what we're getting punched in the face with is how we go about legalizing it, and what the frameworks are going to be, and what kind of taxes are we going to pay, and what kind of package is it going to be in, and how are you going to what are you going to be allowed to say about cannabis, and what are you not going to be allowed to say, and you know, and how many man traps and safes and alarms and cameras and motion detectors do you have to sell a bag of weed? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, my God. And it's being treated like this radioactive. You can literally move radioactive waste around the country easier than you can buy a bag of weed. It's extraordinary.
It is, and it just, you know, and it changes, right? And we're continually changing. One of the things I was taken aback when watching you, I watched, binged, right? I did my research in here, Andrew DeAngelo.com, lastprisonerproject.org, watching some of your television show, Weed Wars, that was on 2011 on Discovery, was kind of how, interestingly, I want to say lax, and I'm sure it wasn't lax to you at the time, California seemed, compared to what, say, Ohio goes through, or what some of these states like South Dakota, where they approve it and then the government says, no, you can't have it, but you can have this, and now it's on the ballot and now it's dead. And so these types of things, it just struck me how different the world was back then. In fact, just the chuckle from right off the bat, you know, this is a reality show of sorts, like Storage Wars, they're following your company, you're starting up, and that all the dynamics and trappings of your standard reality show, except for the disclaimer at the beginning, where they literally talk about how people within the show will be cultivating, selling, and consuming cannabis. It was basically like a Jackass episode of like, please don't try this at home. I was so taken aback after, you know, I recently watched you in CBD Nation, by the way, in that film, another great film where you talk about Jaden and his journey and all those things. And so just how interesting the world viewed cannabis at 2011, where you're at, what it views now, and it's different but it's kind of the same. It is the same. We have less disclaimers, but it feels like if you're in a state like South Dakota, it probably feels very draconian right now compared to what you even had in 11 in California.
Well, if you look at Weed Wars, it was very laissez-faire, because the reason was, one, we wrote the medical cannabis law in 1996 called Prop 215. That was written in such a way that the politicians basically were forced to accept a less regulatory system, a more laissez-faire system. Now, the politicians could have done what they were instructed to do in that initiative, which was to regulate and do some rules of the road. But they didn't want to do that because they didn't want to be associated with cannabis, and they were scared that if they started regulating and licensing, so it's just a free-for-all. Until and some cities would shut you down if you opened a dispensary, and some towns like Oakland, actually, Oakland was the first town to issue a license for a retail dispensary, and we got one of those licenses. In the city of Oakland, probably the most progressive city in the United States, if not one of the most progressive cities in the United States. And they had things like, you could have a felony conviction for weed and still get the license. My brother has a felony conviction for weed, and we were still able to get the license. Yeah. Several years later, when we tried to do that in Massachusetts, we were kicked out. We were run out of town because we had that same felony, and the rules were different there. And they had what is called a felony exclusion.
But he wasn't even, in that case, he wasn't even on the paperwork, right? He was just, you were guilty by association with him just because he was your brother.
He was my older brother, therefore, I was the one on the application, but they still yanked the license from us. First they gave us the license, but then they yanked it. So these are things that in Weed Wars, that's why it was called Weed Wars a little bit, it was California was still the only state at that time. We had a license from Oakland. Oakland was the only town that issued license. There were no other licenses. You couldn't get a license if you were a grower. You couldn't get a license if you were a manufacturer. All those growers that you saw in the purchasing room in that show, they were all unlicensed. They all looked like legacy growers.
Yeah, no, it was totally, you could see, I'm watching, we were just at a testing facility recently here in Ohio, and we watched the whole process from chain of custody and what comes in and all these other standards. And they had talked about the lab testing, and it's all very specific, 2.83 gram containers and all this. And they're dropping off like some bags at the testing lab. He's like, here you go, we're getting it tested. I was just like, whoa, it was so different. In the buying process, the purchasing, brings it in. He just brings his duffel bag in. Here's what I got. Make a transaction, out the door. The looseness of it was
we
interesting.
We actually did have a lab testing program, so we did test things in a lab. But so what we did is we held the weed, and then once you passed the lab result, we paid you for the weed. We kept the weed. If you failed the result, we gave you the weed back. So that's kind of how we did it. Because a lot of our growers are coming from many hours away, so they couldn't wait for the lab. So we'd hold the weed in our vault for them because it was safer than them holding the weed at their farm, right?
It's a great idea.
Yeah. But that was really the only thing. And the lab, all we were testing for was molds and pathogens and potency. You'll notice the potency numbers were a lot lower in those days because there was only one lab on Earth that we had started, and we really wanted to give accurate results and dial our equipment in so that it would give a really accurate result. And I hate to tell it, well, I'm actually quite happy to say that 14, 15, 16% THC is plenty, everybody. Plenty, plenty, plenty. And look at your terpene profiles and look at maybe some of the other cannabinoids in there, because they call it the entourage effect. I call it the ensemble effect from my theater background.
Yes, of course.
And the ensemble effect is the thing that we need to start wrapping our minds around. It's a lot more complicated way of looking at how to predict what each product may do in your body. But we're smart. We can handle complex concepts, can't we?
Yes, but are we capable of making that shift to that degree? I think even just California's numbers alone are something like less than 2% of all products sold in California had under 20%.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you're saying that's 2% is even thinking in that spectrum, and it's not even that inflation of that potency there, like that's a hard dynamic to shift when we're talking a 98% majority are shopping for that high potency.
Well,
what they assume is high potency, even though, again, lab shopping and so on is a big deal.
Yeah, but if the weed wasn't so expensive,
that's a good.
I don't think people would be shopping for potency quite as much as they are right now. It's like I want to get as much active ingredient for my dollar as I can, and I'll worry about titrating my dose. And you just give me a good value, I'll worry about titrating my dose. And it would be nice if we could present products in a more nuanced and complex way that allows people to make a more detailed and informed decision.
It is interesting. Sometimes I just read an article recently about this, and they were talking about it'd be interesting because as someone who was kind of a big part in bringing CBD to the mainstream, both in Weed Wars, you follow up with Jaden and his journey in CBD Nation from David Yakuvovich, like that journey. And you talked about in the CBD Nation film about people basically breeding it out because it's not getting you high. Like, we don't want this. We don't want this thing that doesn't make high. And part of your realization was, well, it's a therapeutic, right? It was what you call the ensemble effect. But we see now CBD heavily marketed by emotion and reaction, right? Feel sleepy, feel good, feel excited. THC cannabis typically marketed by maybe good old days, genetics and brand name, or indica sativa. Now we're getting terpene knowledge. Do you like that CBD promotes it more in the feeling and emotion? Do you think THC would do better in a mass approach in appreciation if it marketed as a reaction versus scientific?
I like scientific, not reaction, because if you put "this will calm you" on the label, it's not going to calm every human being's physiology. It simply isn't. We've just seen some labs here in California, or maybe I think it was in California, might have been Colorado, other places. They went out and got 90,000 samples to test to see if they were marked correctly with indica sativa. 98% of them were wrong.
That is not good.
98% of them are wrong because there really is no pure indica and sativa anymore. The whole thing's been hybrids or what everything is. And the whole indica sativa thing was kind of misguided way of describing the effects of cannabis. At that time, there was no other way to describe it because the lab tests weren't there. All right. We had to present cannabis as a therapeutic, at least in California, before there were lab tests. So what are you going to do? You got to classify it somehow. You can't just say, this is all weed.
It does got to have some marketing in there, right? Some marketing in there.
I mean,
but there is,
because people would come up to you and say, I want something to make me sleepy. My doctor doesn't know what makes me sleepy.
Mm-hmm.
Can you help me? And all of a sudden we found ourselves being doctors. And so I had to go train my staff on all this stuff. And we started to get into the science. That's why we started the lab testing program, because we didn't want to guess, right? We didn't want to guess. We want to say, well, we know it's got this much potency, and we know it's doesn't have mold or pathogen, so it's not going to hurt you if you have a compromised immune system and you smoke it and put it in your lungs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But that gave people a lot more information than they had before. And once it took us a while to learn how to lab test medicine so that we could extract more information from it, because these lab machines are very expensive. They're hard to calibrate, and each one measures something a little bit differently. And so you have to usually have several different types of very advanced, highly sensitive machines that are super expensive, six-figure six-figure investments for each one, if not more than that. So it's been this whole lab testing of cannabis. It's a whole nother thing. You could probably devote a whole show to it, but not only are we seeing, it's just the labs aren't regulated, man. None of the calibrations of the machines are standardized. California just spent $11 million trying to standardize a lab through the UC San Diego, and it's totally failed. They haven't been able to do it. And we're having all kinds of problems with, result inflation, or people shopping around to labs and saying, I'll give you our contract, but you have to promise that every result you give me is over 28%. And the labs are saying, sure.
Yeah, exactly. Or the lab would call you back and say, for an extra couple $100, I'll say it's this. Or your competition, it was this. So do you want a little bit higher? Do you,
Price is Right game. You got to just go 1% higher.
It's heartbreaking in that, but we're talking about, this is, everyone that's using it is using it as a wellness tool. And so when you think about, like, we are talking wellness within this thing, to think in those terms is outside of everything that we should be standing for. So it's kind of like, it's desecrating the whole process. And not only that, but all the work that it takes to get to that end result, all that extra love that can be put into it to absolutely have it at its ideal state, to have your competitor, someone else who doesn't try very hard, be able to hit the same measurements or the same barriers that you are, just by a little bit more capital, and a lie. It's a heartbreaking scenario when you really do care about your craft or your patients or whoever, is
stakeholder. It's good old-fashioned greed. It motivates us to do great things, but it also can motivate us to do some pretty bad things.
It is interesting how it happens. And then you have, people are going to sue. I think we've already had a couple lawsuits from people saying, well, my THC is this, home testing. And as that becomes more popular, as the machines get smaller, as technology gets there, it's going to be like that Subway, people literally measuring that's not 12 inches, sir, it's 11.2. I deserve this. I mean, those things are happening.
That will be $1 million.
Yes. There's a multi-million-dollar case that was just filed last week about Kraft mac and cheese taking longer than 3.5 minutes to cook in the microwave.
Hey, you don't want that in this industry.
No, but was there ever a place for that to begin with? I mean, clearly the pendulum swings in extremes. So at what point, how did it even get there to begin with?
Well, legalization means that disputes, whether they be real or imagined, are settled in the court system, not in the streets. So one might consider that an improvement. But yeah, man, I mean, if people behave badly, then bad things will happen. One of the things that I'm proud about the industry is that, for the most part, yes, there's a lot of ugly things happening in our industry right now. We could all point to a long list of them. But I think by and large, we also are populated by a lot of very good human beings who really want to do the right thing, who've learned their values from the plant itself, or learned their values from suffering, and the plant gave them relief. And we just, those of us who care about these things, have to keep talking about the good values, calling people out who perhaps aren't, and making sure that our industry has, I hope, a higher, I guess pun intended.
Always pun intended. I have decided when you say high in any reference on a cannabis-centric show, you know what you're doing, and it's always pun. I've just given in. You just roll with it.
But I would hope we'd have a higher ethical standard in our industry than, say, big tobacco or big alcohol has in theirs. I mean, it was very interesting to me. And of course, Curaleaf had to walk this back. But the CEO of Curaleaf came out and said, oh, yeah, it's going to be like big tobacco. There's going to be 4 companies. They're going to own the whole thing. They're all going to use the same machines, the same packaging, the same everything. It's going to be a different brand. and that's the way it's going to be. Have a nice day. And I do not subscribe to that at all. And if we end up like that, we have failed, man. We have failed in such a big way. Tobacco is not a therapeutic, period. And it is a different plant to cultivate and grow. It has a different history. It has a different types of farmers and cultivators. And it, in no way should we be holding that up as a model, in my opinion. And same thing with alcohol. And I think we're different. I think we're unique, and I think we can make our own thing, and we don't have to like put ourselves in some familiar box just because it's familiar. Like I said earlier, yeah, weed's more complicated. It's going to take more work, and guess what? We're smart people, and we can figure it out.
Do you think that the industry is losing its why? Like, as big businesses coming in, do you think that, and as the legacy growers, the legacy ancillary guys who are, literally pioneered everything, as they are getting kind of shunned out, or the opportunity is almost too hard the barriers too hard to breach through, either with licensing or whatever. Do you think that we're losing the why? And I know that everybody that we've dealt with in the last 15 years, if I was to ask them, why the hell are you taking so much risk? Like, this is not in any way, shape, or form. You got children, you got family members, but at the end of the day, they each had some type of personal experience that just the alarm bells were screaming off that said, I have to do this. Whether, this is so beneficial to me, this is so beneficial to others. The why was so important that the risk was worth it. Now people aren't even looking over their shoulders anymore. And so they're not even, I hear a lot more talk about money and a lot more talk about exit even before they start, in a different way. And it's almost like I never hear the why anymore.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think the battle for the soul and the why of the whole industry is on right now. And we're going to win some and lose some along that way. But, again, it's here's the thing. Bigger is not necessarily better, right? If you look at the big cannabis companies and the so-called folks that are just in it for the money, and there's some of those folks are quite proud that they're just in it for the money.
I guess if they're honest about it up front, if they can look at me from day one and be like, I'm in it for the money.
Yeah,
I'm like, yes, you are.
That, right? You can appreciate people are being honest and upfront about it, and that's fine. But these big companies, none of them are profitable. Green Market Report just issued a report a couple weeks ago. $500 million the top 12 companies owe in 280E tax.
Yes, it's a business of debt right now. Even the money that's being given out is given out with that intention of, it's a race to the bottom already. Let's loan all this money to them, in a certain capacity.
Feeling very much like a house of cards to me.
Yes.
And I can tell you, because I went to battle with the IRS in Harborside, the best you can hope for is mutually assured destruction. And it will not end well for those companies. They will be on a payment plan. The IRS does not take a haircut. If they become profitable, that payment plan will go up. The IRS will get every single dollar that they have assessed and every single penalty they have assessed. And if you have to do a payment plan for 40 years, they're fine with that, man. They don't care. And here's the interesting thing, if we just want to go into that wormhole for a second. Let's say you didn't pay them. All right, they put a lien on you. All right, so they got a lien on you. Then what do? They can't own the company. It's a Schedule I business. They can't sell any of the assets of the company. It's a Schedule I business. So they can maybe hire a third-party receiver and then take a percentage or something like that. But it would be, no one's really challenged this. We try to, no one's really challenged this. They can't own a cannabis company.
Is that why they're doing more of the leasebacks, or is that just poor decisions that were made, and now they're recognizing that we don't want to own all these assets? To be
the leasebacks are just ways to creatively raise more money to so-called finance your growth or finance your bankruptcy, whichever one you want to, however you want to spin it. What's happening is a lot of these folks are building moats around their businesses, right? They don't want home cultivation. They want limited licenses. They want vertical integration. And so they build their moats but they don't do the work that they need to do to make the frameworks right. And they literally are drowning in the moats that they've built for themselves. And that's what we're seeing, and I'm really worried, because if the big companies are on the verge of collapse, think about where the small companies might be right now.
It is interesting. I often wonder, Canada went legal in 2018, and we're talking with Andrew DeAngelo, andrewdeangelo.com, lastprisonerproject.org. We'll talk about Last Prisoner here in a minute. But when Canada went legal, it was seen as this very exciting thing. They had massive growth, particularly with, speaking of canopy growth and acreage holdings, even Canna Health. Canna Health came in, had massive fraud, got destroyed. The stock market plummeted, hundreds of thousands of dollars lost, acreage holdings, canopy growth, CEOs fired. They expanded internationally. Maybe they shouldn't. I worry sometimes. Everyone wants this federal legalization, but that model wasn't exactly the representation you really want. I mean, they've done okay in some parts, and you're probably a little more knowledgeable than I am, but that big thing where it just became about a very big companies, and they really have struggled financially, and they're going through these learning curves because they are, I'm sure there's some passionate people behind it always, but they're business people. They're like what Curaleaf is talking about. That's what when you said that triggered what happened with Canada. That's what, is that what could happen here? It could, right?
Sure. Generally, capitalism is always moving towards monopolies or oligarchies. I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing that right.
I like it though. You're on screen in a microphone. Everything you say is factually correct and accurate. Just always remember that when you do these appearances. You're always right.
When I say it, it sounds like some kind of baked pasta dish. But,
I was like, yeah, it sounds delicious, actually.
But that's what capitalism likes to move towards, right? Look at Amazon. They own newspapers, they own grocery stores, they own online marketplaces, they own lots of things. Is it a monopoly? Should the antitrust laws be applied?
I don't know. A few years ago, it was a colorful array of delivery trucks down my street. I can't tell you the last time I saw the FedEx dude or the UP. I don't see brown anymore. I don't see blue and red. It's always those Smile Amazon trucks almost every day now. I feel like, so yeah, I don't even see postal trucks as more. So yes, they're taking over the roadways too.
Yeah. And one of the things that was fascinating to me visiting Ohio was seeing those giant fulfillment centers, not just Amazon, but FedEx and giant. 3 million square feet buildings. And I'm like, wow, that's an awful lot of stuff we're consuming. Look at it.
And the conditions, we talk, and it's interesting. Cannabis is struggling with its own employee conditions. You're seeing some places start to unionize and those things. And the conditions inside there can sometimes be terrible, like time limits, stuff limit. How many boxes can you get in a box within a box and a time limit?
Right.
How have you seen as something, if we go back to Weed Wars, there was some great stuff on some of your employees in there and their journeys and such. And you were obviously, and you've talked about it on a few podcasts about learning as you go. Like you're an actor and you became a general manager. And so you had to learn this. And so whether it's Harborside or California Cannabis Industry Initiative or Association, like all these things you're putting out there, employees, I feel like that shift is big business takes over. Now, and one of your big things, you've already mentioned it in the show, training employees, teaching them, is big business takes over. Look at what happens to most fast food places. It's just bad training. Can you breathe? Is there breath on the mirror? You're hired. Employees now are fighting back in that unionization. How has that been interesting for you to watch kind of employee rights become a forefront issue in this industry, as well as Starbucks and places like that?
Well, our approach, Steve and I's approach, is always to treat our employees really well. As much as we can, be as generous as possible. Yes. I think in Weed Wars, the one time I admonished the team is when they're telling customers that our weed isn't any good. And that to me was unacceptable because I had people in the purchasing room working pretty hard to get good weed.
Yeah.
So I felt like we needed to have a unified message as a team. But I remember
it's that was the should I say this or not?
I laugh because I'm about to give you the example. We provided a space for our employees to smoke weed in.
It's not shocking.
In the store, okay.
It's like carbon filters hidden in the closet that they're,
yes,
don't tell anybody, but we won't. Don't ask.
Yes, because everybody was a patient, and I can't tell someone when they can and cannot take their medicine. How am I supposed to do that? I'm not a doctor. I didn't write their recommendation. I'm not the one. They might be in chronic pain. They might need an edible as soon as they wake up in the morning. How do I know? What I managed for and led for was impairment. Yeah. All right. If you're impaired, you go home for the day. Sorry, you're not allowed to work at your shift anymore because you're impaired. I don't care what the substance is you're impaired on. You're going home that day. So we managed for impairment, and we provided a space because I didn't want my staff on their break smoking blunts in their car driving around the neighborhood, man.
Yes, right. It's bad publicity.
Yeah, and that's what will happen if you don't give people, people. It's like, oh, they just won't smoke weed. No. Sorry.
But you will find when you give them that opportunity, they will make it to that room and smoke. It's not.
I had to send plenty of people home for impairment, and I had to fire people sometimes. It's true. And every time a new investor came or a new leader came, we'd always have this same debate. Are you sure we should be providing the space for those people? And it would be the same debate over and over again. And I'm sure now they've taken that away and it's not there anymore now that me and my brother aren't part of Harborside anymore. But that was one example that probably people think we're out of our minds to have done that. But it was actually compassionate management at work. And it was also good management at work because I was not encouraging people to lie and hide from me.
Yes.
And if you got a little too impaired, you got written up. You did get written up, and you did get sent home. And if that happened to you 3 times, you'd lose your job. And that was written down on a piece of paper that everybody signed.
Got your code of conduct.
And that was the pact that we had with our team on that particular issue. But we also gave people, our starting rate for bud tenders, I think, was 17 or 18 an hour.
Back then?
I hear in Ohio, it's 12.
Yeah, I was like, you're $5 ahead of where we're at now in 2022.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I was paying 17, 18, way back in 06, 07. So, and 401k, and the best healthcare benefits on the market, which, by the way, aren't very good. But we got the best ones that that were on the market at the time. And we also had employee assistance programs. So if an employee had a problem with, they were going through a divorce, or they had a sick parent at home, or they needed pet care or something, they could call a number for free and get somebody to help them with that. And that took a lot of pressure off our HR team, because I didn't have people coming into HR going, I don't know what to do.
Yes, I knew it. Yeah, well, but at the same point,
I always have helpful, because employees don't want to come to your HR room and share their personal problems.
No, that's their peer. That's in certain regards, yes, you don't want to feel that even opportunity to be judged. And so
and it's just a human thing that happens, and you couldn't get to work that day, and it's human. It happens all the time. It happens to me, it happens to us, it happens to all of us.
At what point do you think today that as they are unionizing and stuff, it's to a certain degree, it's showing that we are failing them? And what do you think are some things that can be done to better support the staff in those moments? I think about I'd be remiss to not talk about the Last Prisoner Project here, but I get this idea that they are totally comfortable just sending a little bit of money out to whatever charity is of the week. And to me, I think about that internal growth of if that money was given to, say, one of their employees to start an ancillary business in which they can partner with in some way or use the services, would they be making a larger impact on the community? Would they be making a larger impact towards getting people not just to do their job, but then to own the job that they're doing?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. It's something we asked ourselves over and over again. How can we better harness what we actually have instead of trying to go outward and get things that we perceive we don't have? Like, I remember at one point in the Harborside's journey, our investors wanted to hire a marketing firm. And I said, well, why should we do that? We've got 200 employees. They're all marketers. Why don't we just empower them to do it? Now, well, we'll get in trouble. They'll post the wrong thing. We'll get sued and And you know, on that particular occasion, I lost that battle, and they ended up getting a marketing firm, which a year or two later, we ended up firing them and bringing an internal team back in. And you know, so I agree with you. I one of the things that I advise my clients on, the ones in Ohio I'm advising on right now, is everything you need is in your team somewhere.
Yes.
Pretty much. I mean, especially these days, people have lots of skills you don't even know about that aren't even on their resume because they have 6 side hustles and they've developed all these other skills, and you know, they just didn't put it on their resume for whatever reason. But it's
I would hire, one of the very first questions I would ask was, what is your favorite thing to do? What is your hobby? Because my goal was to let you spend 7 to 15% of your time focused on that hobby within our organization. And it was amazing that in that time our staff members taught us photography, which I do to this day. It's half of my career to this day. It taught us, you know, it really was so amazing when you could see that passion come out, and to them, they were feeling validated in a totally different way than they ever expected. And that also built loyalty. And when they're my biggest asset, they are the highest cost to maintain of anything. They're, you know, yes, certain machines are $100,000, but that employee is so much more valuable to the organization. Oh, yeah. And so keeping them there, keeping them loyal is important.
What's sad, I think what you're picking up on, Dustin, is there's a temptation to view employees as labor hours on a spreadsheet. And it's a really strong temptation because we're not profitable. We got 280E. We've got all these problems with regulations and taxes and constraints. And so when CFOs and leaders who are really good at numbers take a look at it and they say, well, Jesus, this labor hours is off the charts. It's 24% of our total income. It should be 14%.
Yes.
And then you start to get those cuts coming down, and you start to lose some of those auxiliary skills that you're talking about. And some not just skills, but culturally, right? You learned photography from somebody. There was a cultural thing going on there that benefited you emotionally, spiritually, creatively, and it created a deeper bond. And when you don't have those deep bonds, like we're seeing right now in a lot of the corporate cannabis models, you got no loyalty for people. I mean, God bless them. We're recruiting some fantastic people in Ohio right now because they don't want to work for the big corporate cannabis companies anymore. They don't want to be treated like hours on a spreadsheet. And so, you know, culture.
There's kind of
culture is the way that we differentiate from all of that. And it does require time, and it does require more labor hours. I mean, like customer service is another thing. It's like the customer's just effed right now in the whole system. It doesn't matter what state you're in. Here in California, they're effed. Everywhere they're effed because no one wants to pay attention. No one wants to take the time. You need more help? Go look on Leafly. Go look there's the internet. Come back and tell me what you want. I'll sell it to you. And it's unfortunate because people don't know. People that need education. People don't know how to choose a product. They don't. And, and the internet can't really teach you the same way,
I think you got to find a way sometimes to engage them, right? I always like to, I work as an educator in the industry. And one of the things we always talk about is on day one is tell me things about you that have nothing to do with the plant. Like give me your hobby that I'm an avid disc golfer. I throw a lot of Frisbees at chains and parks, like those things, right? The other thing could be to get them motivated, whether it's politically or make change. And so we'll segue here and talk about this for a little bit, like things like letter writing campaigns, which is something that lastprisonerproject.org has started. I just read an article about you having one with a fire station up in Michigan, that state Dustin alluded to. We can drive 2 hours and get all the legal cannabis we want. But I can't drive, 10 minutes. It's weird, right? It's weird. 2 hours, I can get anything I want. Right now, I can't get anything in my state. So, but with all this stuff you have learned through this industry at Harborside and all these things, you've settled on or kind of gotten to this place which your passion in your past, you've come a long way since Weed Wars. You're still very similar personality-wise. You still have that same vibe, but you can see some of the maturity and where you're at and how you think of it with trying to co-found and run organizations like Last Prisoner Project and getting these letter writing campaigns.
Or even you're consulting right now, right, Andrew? You're doing a lot of, and to me, you're getting to instill those values at the top of these corporations with these guys that you're working with. And so if there was ever a person that I would want, to teach them from the very beginning what they should be valuing from day one, oh my gosh, I can only imagine 3 years down the line for that organization, what that actually meant for the employees when they embody that reasoning, when they truly understand it. And so it's kind of that instead of empowering Harborside or any of these, it's literally now you got pockets in so many spots that are kind of emblazoned with you.
Well, I mean, we all learned very quickly doing this. So my growth as a leader and manager in 10 years since Weed Wars, it's like, it's like
watching an old audition tape. It's like watching yourself on Superior Court. You're like, oh no.
Yeah, you will cringe. I mean, I sometimes I'll see that little speech I gave the team in the room where I'm like, you can't say bad things about the weed. And I'm like, I probably could have done that a little bit better. I could have been more compassionate. I could have engaged them. I could have asked questions. I could have said, what's wrong with the weed? There's a lot of different things I could have done right in that moment right there. But I was, it was reality. I was visibly frustrated. I was, and so I didn't have the right filters on at that moment as a leader, really. And so, when we let our emotions get the best of us as leaders, you almost always regret that. And staying emotionally regulated, that doesn't mean you're not passionate, man.
It's that pendulum of logic to emotion, and you hope you can land in the middle somewhere. But I mean, it's one or the other half the time. And it's a hard thing to jump out of. Yes.
You learn and you're like, okay, I got to do better next time. And if you're reflective, and I did a lot of self-study, man. I was taking night classes at that time at UC Berkeley Extension about management and leadership. I was reading all the big leadership books, Good to Great, 5-Minute Manager, Creativity Incorporated, all those books. I read them all, and that self-study served me really well, and coming from the theater was good for me in the sense that I cared about people and I cared about their stories and I cared about how they felt, and you get into the arts because you want to be in a non-corporate, more creative environment. That's generally why you get into the arts. And most people get into weed for very much similar reasons. And so having that as a foundation was super helpful to me, because I remember at one point early on, way before Weed Wars, like 07, 08, 07, like 8 months into it, I'm sitting in there in my inventory room, and we've managed to grow enough that I could hire someone. So I hired someone, and it was a young lady, and she had just graduated high school, but she was a patient. In those days, you could be 18, and if you were a patient, you could work you could work at Harborside. And so we hired her because she was just did a great interview, and she was eager, and she loved cannabis. And I remember struggling managing her because I was coming from this kind of underground world, or maybe the creative world, and it was very much a command and control system. And when you do a play, you listen to the director.
We say that.
You shut up and you listen to the director.
Yeah,
Same
yeah.
thing with a movie, right? And when you're in the underground and you're running a load of weed across country, you shut up and listen to the people who know how to keep you safe.
Yeah.
And that you won't get busted. So I came from a command and control model, and certainly my brother came from a command and control model, and it just was not working, right? I'm sitting there and it's just not working. At some point I looked at Adrian and I said, we need to be a team. We need to be a team. Is there a way we can be a team together here?
Yes.
And as soon as I did that and I was real with her and I stopped trying to give her orders, she opened up and she's like, yeah, we can be a team, man. I'm here for you. And let's work on this together. And then I learned that she's really good at Excel, and she organized all the inventory reports. And,
we say it a lot here of, you can, if you want to go fast, go alone. That's that control mode. It's, I can move all the pieces. But if you want to go far, move with others. And that's this, I need to ask my team and their strengths, which eventually in some regards grow the company to a point where I can't control it. They are bringing so much phenomenal growth and their ideas and stuff that it's beyond me now. It's not even mine. It's this living, breathing thing. And so I think it's a really powerful transition that way and it finally allows you to focus on serving your customers or employees or anyone else. And so I think that's a really powerful thing. And I think I'm really, really genuinely glad you mentioned that, because I think it's important for anyone to hear.
Well, I just realized this person's an actor just like me, right? And we're all on the same stage here. So let's really connect. And then if we do that, we can get to the common problem at hand as human beings, as equals, right? Because that's what I was still her boss for 15 years. I was her boss, but we had a shorthand together and we felt like colleagues. I don't think she felt like I was her boss, except once a year when I had to do the performance review.
Yeah. That's when you put on that hat. Sometimes I would even wear a bright hat that day. That's like the yellow hat's on. Don't hate me, but it's the yellow hat today.
Right, the performance review time. Yes,
the
most imperfect thing in the world.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
I haven't spoken to you in a year. Here's what I've observed: all your traits in the last 365 days. I remember them all. Let's talk about it. And let me give you 3%. Come on.
Yes, and then I'm also going to tell you how you can improve and get better within this 60-minute.
I have to ask before we let you go, Andrew DeAngelo, AndrewDeAngelo.com, lastprisonerproject.org. Please check them out. Support that cause. You have a great line as we wrap up. We've referenced Weed Wars a lot, and you have a great line in the first episode about how at the time, you'd been doing it for a few years there, but at the time, you didn't want to get into a job that worried about loose handles, as you're trying to literally worry about the loose handle on a refrigerator. And I feel like you have evolved into someone who now manages department stores full of appliances. Like you're like a Home Depot of loose handles. Do you like what's happened? I mean, do you wish sometimes, as we kind of wrap up here, because cannabis, that you could go back to that loose handle day? Or do you like the fact that you have been fixing and tightening screws of this industry in all sorts of fashions for 3 decades now?
Yeah, I love every step I've taken along the way, but I do enjoy the next challenge and the next step, more than the previous one.
Hey, it's all you can do, right?
Yeah, so the few times where I've had the opportunity to go back and do that kind of work, I've always really enjoyed it and loved it, and it felt like coming home again. But you evolve as a leader, and first you become a manager, right? And then once you get really good at being a manager, you become a leader. The only difference between a manager and a leader is very simple. Managers do what's right, and no, managers do the right thing, leaders do what's right. So that's basically the only difference between a manager and a leader. And there comes a point in most people's evolution when you saw me in Weed Wars, I was sort of in the middle of my evolution as a manager. Once I got to say 2017, 2018, then I started to get more. I was no longer a manager. I'm now a leader. And then leadership becomes its journey until basically the day you die. And you keep trying to get better and better at being a leader, and creating more and more resonance in the things that you're leading, the teams that you're leading. Resonance just means creating the vibe that'll attract the tribe, and just really getting the best out of people and pushing them to their furthest limit without making them feel bad about themselves doing that, but in an inspired way. You always appreciate leaders that believe you can do a little bit more than perhaps you think you can.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And when you have that opportunity, my brother provided that role for me. He was always giving me chances to do that, and he was always expecting a little bit more than I thought I was capable of, and it allowed me to become the kind of leader and person I am now. And I think we just, I love doing what I'm doing right now. I love, a lot of people are like, well, you left Harborside, you could have done anything. Why'd you do a nonprofit organization that tries to get the most vulnerable people in the cannabis community out of prison? I was like, well, because that's what my heart told me I needed to do right now.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
And I was kind of burnt out on, we took Harborside public and all this stuff happened, and I was kind of over that, and I wanted to get back to something that was more part of my roots. And, when I was 9 years old, I'd go visit my brother in prison for weed. And so that I was like, well, what's more roots than that? So, and then the consulting thing, that just keeps the lights on and keeps the roof over my head. But it's really, it's all it's all leadership. And when I'm with my clients, I'm leading. When I'm with the LPP team, I'm leading. When I'm talking to a prisoner on the phone and trying to encourage them because they're locked up and they don't have any opportunities right now, try to encourage them, try to make them feel positive somehow, that I believe in them and that they will get through this, and they'll have a job and they'll have a career and they'll have a life, and it will happen for them. And it's an important message, because we all can transform ourselves. Just a few years before we opened Harborside, my brother got busted with 235 pounds. We lost every dollar we ever made together, me and my brother, up to that point. Both my parents had to take second mortgages on their houses. My parents were already in their late 60s at that time. And just a few years later, we were able to open Harborside. So it's the cannabis folks, we know how to take a punch. We're pretty good at transforming ourselves. You were an actor, now you're doing this. And as long as we're having a good time and we're contributing to the whole, we all have our role to play, And so I'm real happy with what I'm doing right now. But fixing handles was a lot of fun.
I am ready to run through a hempcrete wall after that speech. I'm feeling fired up right now. Wow. Andrew DeAngelo. Well, I am super happy, as I think a lot of people that are able to work in cannabis today, of all these people, whether they're Johnny-come-latelys and billionaires that have just tipped into the market, or they're from legacies, we want them to continue to rise. I think a lot of people are happy that Steve, the work you've done in this industry, right? I think they're really happy for that. So we really appreciate you joining us here on Because Cannabis. AndrewDeAngelo.com, lastprisonerproject.org. There'll be a link in the description below, which you're going to hit subscribe. You got to ask for those subscribes. That's how it works here, Andrew. You got to hit that subscribe button.
Please subscribe. This has been great. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Andrew,
thank you very much for joining us.
Honestly, you're so genuine. We can't thank you enough. Truly, thank you.
All right, man. Peace and love.
All right, take care, everybody.